What's going on, guys, and welcome back. So the video is finally here. Yes, as requested, here we have the lovely Sappers tier list. Now, right before we get into it, do remember that this tier list is purely opinionated. Everything in this tier list could be taken wrong. Just really depends on how you feel about these mons for this tier list. And if I've forgotten something, it's not the first time, it's not the last time. I tried to make sure that I didn't forget anything, and I want to give a shout out to the boys over there in Discord that helped me out. Some of them being like Razor, there was May, Agent Angel, and also another guy, was it Jockish? For like pointing a couple of things out, so hopefully I didn't forget anything. But let's go ahead and get this party started, you guys. Alright, so now it's time for the big reveal here. We're obviously going from D to S tier, and at the bottom we have the I tier. The I tier is totally separate from the S to D tier. Keep in mind, it's totally separate. The reason why I decided to split this up though is because the mons that are coming up from D to S are pure sappers. Both of their skills are sap. The ones that are in the I category, they don't have both of their skills as sap. So I wanted to make that a difference, because I do think it's important if we're considering sappers. I will go into more detail about the I tier list, but do keep in mind that once again they are separate from the D to S tier, because I know that it's going to be taken out of context, but it's the internet, dude. There's nothing you can do about that because it exists. But anyways, you guys, we're going to start from the D tier and work our way up. So what is it? Ominor? I feel like I've never said that name before in my life. He comes in at the top of the D tier right now because of just better saps than all the other guys over here. Like Molar comes in second, and the problem with Molar though is I do believe it's single target. Now Rebiddle, who's higher on the list, is also single target, but I guess in a manual situation, technically speaking, it's still pretty potent if you were playing manually. And then Wisp is at the very bottom of the tier list at the far right, with the weakest natural sapper in the game. Moving on to the C tier, we have Wood Seedler, who is a tank type, I believe. And while his saps are better than Ominor and Molar and Wisp, it's not super duper great. Like in terms of just pure sap, I find that Wood Seedler is fine, but stat wise is not super duper amazing. Now I'm sure you guys are going to be like, but Elio, why does it matter what their stats are? Because sap doesn't scale off a mon's attack. And while that's correct, in terms of survivability, I mean, Seedler has plenty of HP on it, but its attack and defense stat don't even break 2k, so it's pretty piss poor in my opinion. I mean, with books, it does get like sap times 2, which is 80% for a turn on its passive, and then for its active it does get sap times 2, 60% for 2 turns, which isn't bad, but it just leaves a little bit more to be desired. I mean, this is perfectly farmable. If you didn't have any other mod that you wanted to run as a sapper at the moment, then I could perfectly see someone using this. I do believe it was used in Colossus at some point in time, but overall it's just lackluster. Like, there's nothing super duper great about that mon, which is why it's just hanging out at the C tier, because it's a step up above the others, but not a super duper big step up. And then moving on to the B tier, do remember I didn't state this earlier, but left to right is how this list goes. So whatever mon is on the far left is the better or the higher part of the tier, while the mon on the far right is the lower part of the tier. So now coming in at the top of the B tier is Water Miho. Now you may be saying, but Water Miho has a less potent sap than Water Yuki, and I definitely understand that. We've had this debate before in Discord about Water Miho over Water Yuki. Personally speaking, I vouch for Water Miho over Water Yuki, even though her sap is a little bit less potent, just because her animation, at least in my opinion, feels a lot better, and she's a lot easier to raise and a lot easier to book up. That doesn't disregard Water Yuki. I'm not saying Water Yuki is lower than Water Miho, but in terms of this list, she's pretty much on par with Water Miho. I guess in theory you could say that Water Yuki is actually better stat wise, but the problem is that I just don't like her animation, so I decided to put her right behind Water Miho in this instance, because Water Miho has sap 100% for 2 turns, and then for the active it's sap 60% for 2 turns, which goes to 80% with books, while Water Yuki, I'm using that handy dandy bot if you guys haven't checked out the Discord to look this up while I do the video, but Water Yuki has 2 turns sap 70% chance, which goes to 95% for 1 turn with books, and then sap for her active goes to 80% times 2 for 2 turns. So once again, with the book investment, it's kind of a bit meh, and I mean their stats overall are pretty similar to each other. Water Yuki just obviously has a ton more HP. Is either one worth the super evolution? Absolutely not, but I pretty much count them as equal. Moving on though, we have Water Sea Star coming in near the end, not super duper at the end, but near the end, and Water Sea Star is pretty much unusable unless booked up, but luckily the books for Water Sea Star are like dirt nasty cheap and dirt nasty easy to get, so it's not too much of a problem of booking her up. But because of her low stat pool, like her HP is dirt nasty low, defense is hella low, she's at the bottom of the B tier just because without proper investment, aka a super evolution to make her at least like acceptable, it's a bit of a weak sauce. Like her sap is technically better than Seether if it was to hit, but at the same time it's kind of not, just because it's a little bit lackluster. But in terms of overall investment, I mean, it's really up to you if you wanted to decide to super evolve her or not, but I would honestly just pick up Water Miho and go along with that. Moving on though, we have the bottom of the B tier, which is Rebiddle. Now Rebiddle is a Dark Mon, so Rebiddle does get benefit from running like a more crit rate build, even though sap doesn't scale off the damage of that Mon. The higher physical attack that you have is the higher raw damage output that you get. Yeah, sap doesn't affect it, but if I can do more damage to a mob that I'm fighting, that's going to assist my wave clearers, that's going to assist me on golems, even if they do resist the sap, because I'm getting more raw damage out. I mean, it's a win-win situation right there. But Rebiddle stats aren't bad. It is a tank type coming in with sap times 2, 80% chance for 1 turn on its passive, and then for its active it has sap times 2, 90% chance for 2 turns, which is pretty potent, and the stats on Rebiddle are pretty good. They're superior than Water Sea Star, but the reason why Rebiddle is at the very edge of the B tier is because it's single target. Single target means it's very impractical in a auto situation unless you want to do golems manually, which I don't know who would want to do golems manually. And there's a chance if you're running Rebiddle where the AI could just attack one of the side units and not the golem itself, which is going to result in time loss because sap's going to stick on those side units. But if the main golem falls, well, congratulations, the dungeon's over. So while Rebiddle would be useful in a manual situation, active is like Russian roulette, which unfortunately does hurt its position in the tier list just because it's kind of impractical in most situations. But it does exist, it is usable if you have one, and it deserves to be where it's at. Moving on though to the A part of the tier list, we have Light Radius coming in hot at the top of the A tier list, and then Fire Loki's following behind it, while Dark Floor is at the very end of the A tier, or the lower part of the A tier. Now you may be wondering, why is Light Radius over Fire Loki? Listen guys, I totally understand that mons like Rebiddle and Light Radius, even Fire Purse or Wet Artemis are kind of hard to come across. Totally get that. But it doesn't mean that that mon doesn't exist, and it doesn't mean that that mon doesn't deserve to be on the tier list. Light Radius, in my opinion, does beat out Fire Loki because Light Radius has a lot more attack than Fire Loki. We're talking about like at least 600 more attack, and while their sap is pretty similar, I think 600 attack is a pretty hefty amount. Like Fire Loki is 600 attack away from Light Radius after Super Evo. If you don't Super Evo Fire Loki, there's like an 800 attack gap, which is pretty huge in my opinion, which puts Light Radius at the top of the A tier. Not to mention, you can book up Light Radis a lot easier than Fire Loki, because we're assuming that all of these mons are booked for this tier list. You could argue that Light Radis is easier to farm out, but the only issue with Light Radis is pulling a Light Radis. While Fire Loki can be farmed out as well, is it going to take time? Yeah, you're going to have to sacrifice 16 Lokis of whatever element, not counting your Fire Loki, to get him to Evo 3, and then to Super Evolve him. So both of these mons have basically a steep investment to get them to where they're at. And if you're going to go investment to investment, I do think Light Radis still beats Fire Loki out. I'm not saying that Fire Loki is garbage, especially after his recent update and his super evolution. It's just that in this scenario, Light Radis does beat him out slightly. You may disagree with that because Light Radis is a bit of a glass cannon, and I could totally understand that. But I mean, at the end of the day, I would consider them both equal at this point. They would both be at the top of the A tier, just same way that Water Miho and Water Yuki are. And then coming in at the last part of the A tier is Dark Floor. Now, Dark Floor is a exotic, so it's not really an easy mod to get, which kind of sucks, especially for newer players. But Dark Floor does exist, and Dark Floor has Sap times 3 with an 80% chance for 1 turn on its 3-star skill. If you book that up though, it does go to 90% for 1 turn, and then Sap on its active at 90% 1 turn. Which is pretty potent. The only thing that sucks though is just that it's 1 turn, so if it's kind of resisted or if that active doesn't really stick, it's kind of a bit lackluster. But I think the 3-star skill makes up for it way more than anything else, because 3 times Sap, 90% chance, 1 turn, plus a dark type, I mean, that's easy damage. Even if your mon isn't built like with crit rate attack, you can still get some pretty potent damage out of it if you're running crit rate attack HP, just enough so that Floor can survive but do damage. And I mean, stat wise, it's definitely pretty equal to Fire Loki, and I guess you could argue in some instances it is better than Fire Loki. But with Fire Loki's super evolution, I think it gives it a little, like, it gives a slight hair above Dark Floor, not considering the crit damage at all. But Fire Loki does have more potential for its Sap to stick over Dark Floor. So Dark Floor comes in at the end of the tier list of the A part, because of just where it sits at. Now moving on to the S tier, we have Fire Persephone coming in at the top of the S tier, and then Water Artemis very, very closely behind this. Now, I consider this a lot, but it's pretty simple to see. Since this is a Sappers tier list, the main thing that I looked at was just the simple fact of how much Sap can these mons put out. Is it times 1? Is it times 2? Is it times 3? What is the rate behind it? And then I also took into mind what their damage is. So the difference between Fire Persephone and Water Artemis is probably, I think I want to say maybe 100 or 200 damage for their raw attack stat, which isn't a huge gap like Light Radis versus Fire Loki, but it's enough to make a difference when you consider skill books. Like Fire Perse's skill books are a lot more potent than Water Artemis, which is why she's at the top of this list. Like, not even considering leader skills or anything. With Fire Purse being fully booked up, her Sap times 2 goes to 100% for 2 turns, and then her active goes to Sap times 2, 100% chance for 2 turns. Water Artemis's Sap fully booked up is Sap times 2, 90% for 2 turns, and then her active is Sap times 2, 90% for 2 turns. So literally, Fire Purse beats out Water Artemis by 10%, which is still 10%. But stat wise, they're pretty much identical at this point, so I would consider them fairly equal. But Fire Purse is like roughly 2.5% better than Water Artemis at the end of the day if both mods are fully skill booked up. Just saying. Just saying. But both of them are pretty potent Sappers. They are currently the best ones in the game as complete and natural Sappers, and that's why they're at the top of the list, boys. And now, for the moment you've all been waiting for, even though it's already been thrown out of context, we have the I tier. Now, the I tier has been a part of the tier list that I've made before as Impractical. While these don't really count as Impractical, like I said at the start of the video, they don't count as dedicated sappers to me. They don't have sap on both skills. Some of these mons do have morale boost, which means they'll get their sap off quite quickly. But in terms of raw sap, they don't have it on both skills, which doesn't mean that they're not usable. It's just that I consider them on a different part of the tier list. Now this also rates from left to right, so the mon on the left is the best part of the tier list, while the mons on the right are the worst part of the tier list. So starting from right to left, we're going to go ahead and build up to Dark Yuki. Starting from the far right, we have Light Moonflower, who I believe has Fearless Taunt and Sap. Now, this isn't super duper practical to use in a PvE situation, but I could understand, especially if a noob cake kid end up pulling a Light Moonflower. Technically, you could run her on your defense. Am I going to say like Light Moonflower is top tier? Absolutely not. But the Fearless Taunt and Sap could probably wipe out some newer players' defense teams or their offensive team if they're not paying attention, just for the simple fact that Sap is a lot more potent than it was before, and depending on your setup, it could be usable in that situation. But if you consider everything else in the game, yeah, Light Moonflower is trash. Moving on though, we have Dark Arthur coming in a little bit above her. Dark Arthur is super duper dirt nasty low on this list for the simple fact that he has HP aggression on his 3-star skill, and then he has sap on his 5-star skill. This makes him extremely impractical because his moveset makes literally no sense. The issue with his sap, especially being on his 5-star skill though, is that not only is he an HP aggressor, so he doesn't really benefit from you giving him additional attack to just raise up his raw damage when it comes to his sap, but also the fact that he has to have SP generation to get to his 5-star skill for his sap. And then once the sap gets resisted, it's like, congratulations, you've literally wasted like 3 or 4 turns getting his SP full, all to get his sap resisted, which makes him extremely impractical. Yes, he can survive the hits, yes, he can deal a little bit of damage, but in terms of sap, he's a very piss poor excuse of a wannabe sapper. His just moveset is Weird Champ, but I figured I would include him in this because Razor brought him up, and I didn't want to include him in this, like I didn't want to include Dark Banshee, for example, and Dark Anu, because while they exist, I find them extremely impractical to use, but I just thought I would throw him in there. Moving on though, we have Light Cosmo coming in a little bit above Dark Arthur, because Nestia did this like a year or 2 ago, but you can run a quad team of Light Cosmo and B10 and completely just demolish B10, like 100% clear rate because of adrenaline and sap. All of the Cosmos can heal themselves or heal each other, and then you can also get sap off. Now, he is crit rate reliant, which is a bit of a weird champ, but I don't think it really impacts his skills too much, because it does give him a little bit of damage, but it doesn't leave room for much in terms of like super duper raw damage, which is a bit unfortunate. But he does have a lot more practical use than Dark Arthur, because you can literally farm out, you know, a ton of these guys and run them in B10 100% no problem, which puts him above Dark Arthur. Even though Dark Arthur is a nat 5 contract mon, I'm just not a big fan, even though I do have one. Moving on though, we have Light Todora. Light Todora and Dark Boltwing both share essentially the same move set, which is morale boost into sap, which means they're able to get their sap off fairly quickly versus any other mon on this tier list other than Jormungandr, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're super duper top tier. Thank you guys on Discord for reminding me that Dark Boltwing does exist though. And I mean, I would say they're pretty much equal, because Light Todora does have morale boost 25% chance. 25% chance for SP regain. Obviously it's 100% for itself. So it does get its sap times 3 off pretty reliably, and it's at 80% for 1 turn, so I could definitely count on that. And then Boltwing comes in with morale boost with 15% for all allies, and it comes in with also sap times 2, 90% chance for 2 turns. So while Todora beats it out in terms of raw sap, the 2-turn sap on Boltwing, in my opinion, is a little bit more potent than what Light Todora has. And in theory, you could get a little bit more damage out of Dark Boltwing just because it's a dark type. But both of these mons are super duper similar. One comes from the Guardian Dungeon and one you can farm out through Fusion. So I would pretty much consider them equal, especially if you have a different setup with Boltwing. Boltwing may be slightly more appealing because its morale boost affects everyone. But Todora has its own self-sustain of getting its sap off. The only thing that sucks though is that if the sap doesn't stick, or if it does stick, it's only one turn, so you kind of need hopefully some more SP going along to get that, well, to keep that pattern going of making sure that sap times 3 sticks with every sap. Moving on though, we do have Dark Pip. Dark Pip has Battle Rush and sap, which is pretty similar to not only Light Todora and Dark Boltwing, but I put Dark Pip a little bit above both, just for the simple fact that even though I'm no longer a big fan of Battle Rush, it does have self-sustain proper abilities, and not proper abilities. It does have ability to self-sustain itself, which is great in terms of survivability. So you're free to run this a little bit more glacier than you would run something else, because as long as it doesn't die on the turn that it does sap, on the next turn it should be able to heal itself up pretty decently. Bugs on it aren't super duper hard to get. It is an exotic mon, but I think overall it would beat out Dark Boltwing and Light Todora simply by a little bit, just because you could get a little bit more damage out of Dark Pip. And then following Dark Pip though is Wood Hohenheim. Now I'm sure you guys are surprised to see Wood Hohenheim, because the Hohenheims are pretty much like memes in terms of nat 5s in MSL, but Wood Hohenheim is actually a pretty solid choice. I have tested my Wood Hohenheim out in B10, and she's also usable in B11. Back in the day when Hohenheim first came out, I even brought in my Wood Hohenheim, try saying that 5 times fast, into B10 at Evo 1. I think she was on like HP attack defense, no, or she was on HP attack, and she survived at Evo 1 level 60. I mean, she had trinkets on her, but she survived. So even at Evo 1, I found her to be a useful mon. And running her in a composition where you're using sap, like if you wanted to run a sapper and her with resistance down and sap, it's pretty similar to you running 2 sappers. Like, I've tested this out, and sometimes she would actually beat out running 2 sappers or 3 sappers depending on what golems that you're doing. My test came from B10 where there would be times where the time would be equal, or it would be maybe a second or 2 behind in terms of running 3 sappers versus 2 sappers and Hohenheim. But in the best case scenario though, Wood Hohenheim in the team composition would outdamage a triple sap team, just for the simple fact that resistance down made sure that the other 2 sappers saps stuck, which again would result in more DPS. So Wood Hohenheim is actually a pretty decent sapper, even though she's not technically a natural or a dedicated sapper. So she's not someone to scoff at if you don't have if you don't have a fire purse and a water Artemis sitting in your inventory right now. If you have a Wood Hohenheim and a fire purse, go ahead and go at it. She's just as usable as any other mon, especially at the top part of this tier list. Moving on though, we have Wood Cernunnos or Cernunnos. I keep just slaughtering its name. This mon has Undying Volition on its 3-star skill, I believe, and then sap on its 5-star skill, which I may have that confused. Let me make sure real quick. Okay, it has sap on its 3-star skill and then Undying Volition on its 5-star skill. I thought that sounded a little bit odd. While once again not a dedicated sapper, its sap is pretty potent, and especially with it being its passive, and if you book it up, it does go to 2 turns. Not saying that I would fully book up a Wood Cernunnos, but in terms of uses, you could definitely use this mon in golems, and especially the higher up golems, because of Undying Volition, can make sure that your party survives. And it's not a big deal if its sap doesn't stick on its passive though, or its 3-star skill, for the simple fact that it can do it again. Like, it could do it as long as its SP isn't full, it can do it again. So it's not a super big deal. It's not super duper reliant on SP like a mon like Dark Pip is, which is perfectly fine, and that's why it's where it's at. I would argue that Wood Jormungandr and Dark Yuki are slightly superior than that, just for the simple fact that morale boost and sap for Wood Jormungandr is a lot more appealing to me than Sap and Undying Volition, at least to where I'm at with B11, but it is what it is. Coming in though at the second part of the top of the impractical Sappers, still usable, but you know, they're not dedicated Sappers, is going to be Woody Ormagander, because not only does he have his discernment lead, which is super duper great for shredding resistance in golems, but with morale boost for itself and then also sap, is definitely a potent mon for sure. I mean, come on you guys, morale boost 40% self, not even fully booked up, and then sap times 2, 90% for 2 turns. He should be, especially if he's built more like DPS based, he should be getting his sap off roughly every other turn at the very minimum, if not every turn after the initial boost of morale boost. So he's super duper great in my opinion. His stats really do facilitate building him more DPS like, especially like not water Zubaji, but wood Zubaji for Titans, just because he has plenty of HP. Defense is acceptable, and I feel like I could definitely build this mon more attack based and get away with it. And making sure that his sap can come up very often is super duper appealing. And he's not a mon that I would really have to worry about bringing in somewhere, because his sap is always going to get off with that morale boost, which makes once again him a very good sapper in my opinion. And then I'm gonna go ahead and end this tier list here, boys, with Dark Yuki. Obviously, Dark Yuki is the queen of the mons that aren't dedicated sappers, but still usable, just for the simple fact that you could literally bring her everywhere. Now, SP Siphon isn't super duper useful in a golem situation, but it's usable, especially everywhere else, and especially with the recent sap boost. It's obviously very super duper obvious why she's at the top of the list, for the simple fact that, come on, you have a Darkmon, you can build her tanky if you want. If not, you can build her more DPS base and get some damage out of her, especially with the additional crit damage. She has SP Siphon, which is great in terms of like a clan versus clan or a PvP situation, where you can make sure Mon doesn't get their 5-star skill off. And then she also has sap, and her sap in itself is pretty potent. Let me look it up real quick. Her sap is 3 turns 80%, and this is just like raw. Sap times 3, 80% for 1 turn. If you book her up, it goes to 2 turns. That's still pretty potent sap, even though she doesn't have it dedicated on both her passive and her active. Now, keep in mind, I will state one more time, the guys here at the bottom of the list is totally separate from the S to the D tier. These are mons that aren't dedicated sappers, but they're still sappers. They're still 100% usable in their own regards. It's just that I had decided to separate them. None of these mons at the bottom of the I tier, unless you want to count like Dark Arthur and Light Mandy, are garbage. Dark Arthur and Light Mandy, complete trash in my opinion. But all the other mons going from right to left are all usable. If you have them, feel free to use them. Feel free to give them a try, you guys. They're still worth having that slot on your team. It's just that I wanted dedicated slappers, slappers. I wanted dedicated sappers for this tier list, and then I wanted mons that aren't traditional sappers on this tier list as well. But yeah, that's pretty much it, you guys. I'm sure some of you guys would disagree, which is perfectly fine, because once again, this tier list is 100% opinionated. But here it is, boys. I definitely hope it helps. If you haven't considered already, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss out on the next video. And as always, guys, I'll see you in the next one.